Hello again, and welcome to First Christian Church's Adult Fellowship Bible Study. This is our 13th lesson in First Maccabees, and it will be our final lesson in First Maccabees. It will cover the material that's found in the last three chapters, 14, 15, and 16. Chapter 14 opens with a short story about the capture of King Demetrius II by a neighboring country, that being as follows. King Demetrius fighting against, in the civil war against Trypo, tries to break the deadlock in that civil war by going to a neighboring country, which is Media, tied with Persia, and solicits their support to join his side. And instead, the Parthian king who overrules that region captures him alive and decides to keep him. And in fact, treats him well, does marry him off to his daughter, although the king's already married to the Egyptian Cleopatra, and she doesn't handle it very well, according to some other histories. So that's the situation at that point. But most of chapter 14 is devoted to praise of the Maccabees in general and Simon in particular. First is a song of praise and eulogy type format that's there. Secondly, there's praise coming in, according to them, from both Rome and Sparta for Simon particularly, as well as a decree by the Jewish people and priests to honor him. He's aged at this point. His wartime exploits are highlighted, especially his opening the route to the Mediterranean Sea by capturing Joppa, which was a port city or port harbor. A key point in this underlying eulogy is that Simon's leadership should be there throughout the land, because he's allowed them to practice their ancestral religion, not a religion of Hellenized Judaism. And of course, that then would apply to the whole Maccabee regime. There is a strong line of scholarship that says that verse 15 of chapter 14 is the end of the original book of First Maccabees. The remainder of that chapter and the additional two chapters, 15 and 16, are, scholars say, placed there to answer questions that come up in the last few chapters of chapter 14. Of the last couple of chapters, especially a little bit in chapter 14, to clarify some of that, as well as to add other aspects to the story, and particularly because there's been no mention of Simon dying as of yet. But in our version that we have of First Maccabees, there's no indication that is the break. Diplomacy with Rome and Sparta are mentioned as the next thing right after verse 15, but in a way that reflects that these Spartans and Romans are grieving for some reason, but there's no explanation for why they're grieving. Scholars, though, poo-poo that idea, in that mindset just didn't exist in Rome or Sparta, either one, and based on other histories that you read. The last half of chapter 14 is devoted to decrees made by the people, the Jewish people, and the priest, to officially honor Simon, and also to memorialize the Hasmonean dynasty Maccabee dynasty. Uh, it was issued on September of 140 BC, which is actually before his official death. The decree is especially direct with the point that because war occurs, wars happen, and therefore you need Solomon and his sons to forever be the leaders and high priest, uh, at least until a trusted prophet appears. Scholars point out that not all Jews, although it implies here all Jews agree to this, not all Jews agreed or concurred with this concept or decree. In fact, many of the later political parties evolved from this disagreement over whether or not the Maccabees and Hasmoneans should be leaders. Scholars also point out that this idea of a trustworthy prophet, in other words, until a trustworthy prophet appears, is not the Messiah concept, but rather refers to the time of Saul and David, when the king would be and high priest was appointed by the prophet, and the person was anointed by that prophet. No such prophet exists in that period of time of Israel or Judah. So the current rulers, the Hasmoneans, are not ruling with that highest level of anointment in their religious system. That is, they are without the full title and full anointment of the title King of the Jews bestowed by a prophet from God. This decree is the natural ending of First Maccabees. The next two chapters that are there are basically to clarify some things that have come up here in chapter 14. Chapter 15 begins with a story about how the new how a new person tries to become the Seleucid king. Now that Demetrius is bottled up in a foreign country as a captive of Media and Persia with a new wife, Antiochus VII, who was another son of Demetrius I, Demetrius II being also a son, and so therefore a brother to Demetrius II, tries to lay claim to the throne. He contacts the Jews for their military support against Trypo to help him gain access to the throne, but has trouble getting into the country to start with. He's at sea until Cleopatra, the queen, this is the Egyptian daughter, Egyptian Pharaoh's daughter, or king's daughter, Cleopatra Thea, who was the former wife of Demetrius II. She allows him to enter, and then she marries him. Therefore, she's now become the wife of the third king of the Seleucids with this marriage. Antiochus himself becomes king in 138 BC. Rome confirms and advises all the neighboring countries to support the Jews, according to this article, and warns these neighboring countries, including the Seleucids, not to interfere in Jewish affairs, leave them independent. But then Antiochus initially agrees with this, but then he breaks his agreement with them once he has Trypo bottled up and no longer needs their military to help him. Antiochus VII orders his army under a general named Cendebeus to attack and siege Judah, which he does. But Simone's son, John, going by the name of Hyrcanus, takes charge of the army since the old man Simon is too old, or Simeon is too old to lead. He's too aged to be in the field. These Jewish forces defeat Seleucids, as is the normal case under the Maccabees. But there is an attempted coup shortly thereafter within Judea against the Maccabees. A man named Ptolemy, in other words, the Egyptian name, is married to Simon's daughter. And he attempts to murder, or actually does murder, his father-in-law along with two other sons of Simon, leaving only John to survive. And he survives only because he gets wind of this and actually gets out of town before is able to escape before the coup is actually fulfilled. John makes his way back to Jerusalem in time to gain control of the defenses there and stops Ptolemy's gang. According to Josephus, no, those details are not written in the book of Maccabees. Whether Ptolemy's coup was part of Antiochus VII's efforts is not clear, although there are some histories that imply it is. First Maccabees does not mention that shortly after the coup, Antiochus' army then invades Judea and actually sieges Jerusalem successfully and actually captures the city, breaking their defenses, and a peace deal then is negotiated between John Hyrcanus and the Seleucids. This John is, of course, the third son of Simon. He goes by the name John Hyrcanus. He becomes high priest and reigns as high priest from 134 to 104 BC, which was quite a long time, 3 decades during that period of time, and becomes one of the more famous high priests of Jerusalem, or of the Judea. First Maccabees ends abruptly at this point, essentially with the religion back under the control of the Hasmoneans. They are able to worship their own religion, that is the ancestral religion, and not being forced to worship under a Hellenized version of Judaism, which is where they were at before. But the Seleucids are in control of just about everything else. Next week, we will move into 2nd Maccabees. We will not cover it chapter by chapter as we have 1st Maccabees, and mainly because this 2nd Maccabees is not a continuation of history. All it is, or in other words, it's not a sequel. It's essentially taking the first 7 chapters of 1st Maccabees and retelling that history with some additional insights. So what I'll do is summarize some of those main points, and we'll move through that fairly quickly. Also, we'll cover the other 2 books of Maccabees, and all of that will be accomplished before the end of 2020. So I hope you have a good Bible study, and we'll see you again here next week.